Hello, a warm welcome to the Mental Wealth Mastery Show. We are your hosts, Rani and Suraj, holistic psychiatrists and mental health coaches. In this show, we bring some unique perspectives on human psychology and mental health to show how anyone can have mental well-being. All it takes is looking in the right direction. Today, we bring an interview with Dr. Amy Johnson, a coach and author of Just a Thought and a little book of Big Change, where she explains how the mind works in creating our reality and how we can have lasting peace of mind.
We have this mind-body physicalness, obviously, but is that all we are? People can look into that themselves, but for me, there's no question that's not all we are. That's just the machinery.
So this interview was recorded for our very first Mental Wealth Mastery online summit that was held in November 2021. Dr. Johnson was one of several speakers who spoke at this summit. So in this interview, Dr. Johnson talks about what led her to move from clinical psychology into coaching, why psychological problem solving can distract us away from true well-being, and then who we are beyond our psychology. So let's jump in and join this very interesting conversation.
Hi, Amy. So lovely to have you with me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I have known about your work, but I haven't had a very in-depth one-to-one conversation with you. And so this is a really good opportunity, not just for me to know more about your work and how you help people, but also for the listeners. Delighted that you are part of this Mental Wealth Summit. So thank you once again. I know you are a trained psychologist, but I don't think you practice traditional psychology. So can you tell us a bit about your journey and, what led you from training to be a psychologist to be a coach and in a way teach a different paradigm?
I always loved psychology. I always loved I was so curious, even as a kid, about how people work and why we do the things we do. So I studied social psychology, I studied clinical psychology. And partway through my studies, I just kind of realized with regard to mental health and the clinical side of things that it just didn't seem like I wanted to work in a medicalized kind of way with people. There was just that sort of approach, as there is, that there's a problem here and we need to fix it. And I was really just interested in how do people just become happy? How do we tap into how we felt as little kids? Those were more the questions that had always driven me. And so I'm so grateful for my psychology training, but I'd realized partway through it that that's not the direction I wanted to go in. And at the time, the coaching field was brand new. It was very new. And everyone asked what sport you coached if you said you were a coach. So it was not a normal thing to do. But I looked into it, and that's the direction I headed in, just because, again, it felt more aligned. And so I did that for several years before I even came across this kind of understanding that we share.
We discussed about habits such as overeating or excessive drinking. Why do people find it hard to change those?
I think the reason it feels so hard to change it is because we don't fully understand it, because it looks like a problem that we're just wanting to go away. When we have a habit or an addiction or anything, anxiety, depression, everything in our culture has just pointed us to see that as a problem, like this shouldn't be here. And of course, it's uncomfortable. It does create issues in our lives. It's very inconvenient. It's very painful. But when we view it as a problem, and then our whole line of thinking is about how do I make it go away? How do I make it go away? There's so little we can do with that. All we can do is try to do these things to just squash it. We medicate it. We try to change our thoughts, change our feelings. It's all very manipulative to chase this thing away. And I just don't think that goes very far for people. So what does help is really seeing, wow, what if we are all healthy by nature and we feel this moment-to-moment experience that arises within us? And as much as our mind might call it a problem, and as much as it's uncomfortable at times, what if it's not a problem? What if we innocently misidentify with our experience as if that's who we are? So for me, I had a lot of anxiety. I had an eating disorder, and I was just flooded with uncomfortable feelings, with thoughts that that were not very kind at all, stressful thoughts, unkind thoughts about myself. And I just took those as truth. I didn't know really, I just didn't know that this was, that thought just showed up and that it was very habitual, which sounds strange. You would think that we would know that. And I did, I guess, know it intellectually. On some level I knew, but not deep enough to where it really made a difference. So it's like we live in this sea of thought and we become so identified with it, we don't even realize we're thinking. We just think that's life and it's me and it's a problem. And from that place, we do anything we can to just feel better, to just feel like ourselves again. So long answer to your question, but I think it's like when we misunderstand our experience, and especially when we misunderstand discomfort, we're just going to kind of end up in the wrong direction, because now it looks like a problem rather than something that isn't us and that's actually pointing us back home.
We wondered what Amy could suggest to the very common question of how do I stop overthinking?
Very common question. I think we can probably all relate to that, and the way it looks to me, I don't see that we're in charge of the thoughts and feelings that show up. I really don't. It just looks like thought and feeling shows up all the time, and it's very habitual. So yes, it'll go in directions, it'll be the same thoughts a lot of times as it was yesterday. Like that's just the nature of human psychology. But it's not about changing it or stopping it so much as seeing the nature of it, seeing that we aren't it. There's a lot of things that our mind talks about incessantly over and over again that maybe if they don't feel so personal or we're not tapped into them or listening so much, they're just playing in the background and we're going on with our day and they're just there. Do you know what I mean? But then of course there are other thoughts that we're very much listening to and that feel so personal and that we start listening to them as if that's all there is. So again, I don't see how to change the way a brain works or a mind works in a very easy, instant way. But I don't think it's about that. I think it's about getting curious about our real nature beyond our psychology. Psychology is habitual for sure, but we are not that. And when people start to sense, okay, this is just a mind talking, this is just thought arising, it's not me, it's just what my brain is doing. There's a space that grows, there's an ability to be with a brain that's saying the same things over and over again, be with repetitive thoughts, but kind of know, wow, I'm the one hearing that. Like I'm the one aware of that. That's not me. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's kind of like seeing in that bigger perspective, thought shows up, feeling shows up. We're not it. Like we have this mind body physicalness, obviously, but is that all we are? People can look into that themselves. But for me, there's no question that's not all we are. That's just the machinery. So when the machinery is just doing what the machinery does, and I have a sense of me that's so much bigger than what the machinery is doing, again, in that space, it's like, why would we need to jump in and change or fix something? It comes, it goes. It's not us. Now that space is what we're always trying to help grow for people, I think, like helping them feel, okay, well, who and what are you beyond your psychology? Because totally understandably, when all we know is our psychology, it's a mess in there. And of course, we're going to try to change it. But it's kind of like trying to change the weather. The weather's always changing. Isn't it make more sense to kind of see, okay, the weather's always changing and I can have a good day no matter what the weather's doing. The weather, my peace of mind, my health, my happiness are not dependent on the weather. What if we knew that about our own psychology, about our own human weather? Then again, there's nothing to jump in and willpower away with all this effort, which I think only ever makes things worse, because now we're complaining about it and trying to fix it, and we're sending ourselves a message that this is a real, solid, personal thing that needs to change. But it's none of that. We live in this seamless flow of experience that can't not change. It's always changing on its own. The problem isn't that it's solid and stable and harmful. The problem is we think it is, that we identify with it. One of the most helpful things for me and for a lot of the people I talk with has been seeing what you just said, that our experience isn't personal. And that's a very hard thing to see sometimes, because the nature of thought, the nature of our mind, I think, is that the nature of a brain is that it makes everything about us. I mean, our brain is just an organ that is here to try to help this physical body survive. That's it. That's what it cares about, right? More than anything, is this physical body has to survive. So everything is about me in our own heads. It just is, content wise, the content of it. So when we're worried or we're fearful or we're anxious, all the content is about me and my life and what might happen. So the story is incredibly personal for all of us, but it's so huge, huge to begin to see past the story. The story's always changing. The story in my mind says I'm not good enough, and then I'm great and there's no problems. And, like it flip flops all over the place. Life is horrible. Life is great. Like, we don't want to hang on the content in the story. It's very fickle. It's not very accurate, definitely not very consistent. It's more about seeing that thought arises in the same way for all humans. That's universal. And what it's talking about, yeah, that's going to be whatever, based on your mood, based on the weather, based on whatever. But the process, the fact that thought arises and brings this experience to life, that's not personal at all. It may be for some people. I mean, for some people that might not do anything for them. But yeah, for me, it was huge to see, oh my gosh, it's not all about me the way my mind says it is. And when I have a thought or a feeling or I take some action, any part of my psychology, that's not about me either. That's just my psychological mind running me around. So for me, that was a huge insight. For others, they'll have other insights. And that's the beauty, is I think, I don't personally don't really teach anything. It's like we kind of come together and question things and look at, like, what if you're not as sick as you think? What if you're actually okay? And then the beautiful process, as you know, is people have the insights that they need to have.
We asked Amy to explain what she meant by innate health and resilience.
To me, that's just who we are before. Well, it's not really before anything. It's who we are in everything, but it's our essence, like we were saying earlier, like, what if there are no problems? What if we can't possibly be broken? We just have this flow of experience that we misidentify with. It's just mistaken identity. We think that's us. We identify with the words and the stories, but that's not who we really are. So I think when we start to question the content of our thinking a little bit and we see, okay, maybe that's not who I am, we start to discover, wow, there is this like infinite pool of resilience, if we want to call it that, of innate health, like, because there just can't possibly be a problem there. The only time we experience a problem or any suffering is when we misidentify with a thought. When a thought shows up and we think it's us or it's the truth and we identify with that, we suffer. And that's beautiful. We're supposed to, because that suffering wakes us up and says, whoa, something's not right here. And it's right. Something's not right here. We are not our limited ideas. We're not concepts. We are the infinite expansiveness of the entire universe. Like, words can't describe it. So when we get in our heads and identify with this little story of who we think we are and how things are going and what we need to do to be okay, that should hurt. That should feel very restrictive and very tight. And it should create issues, because that's all of that's happening to get our attention, to be able to see the bigger truth of things.
Let's find out what Amy suggests for practices like mindfulness for well-being.
Yeah, I think practices like that can be really helpful for people. But ultimately, what's helpful is knowing how it works, or having a sense of how, having a sense that when thought shows up, if you're going to do a mindfulness practice, for example, see that, okay, this thought can come and go and I'm not controlling it. I can like it, I can dislike it, and it's going to come and go either way. And something that I feel is me, or some bigger awareness, or, there's a sense that we all have of just being aware and alive. That's not affected by what comes and goes. That's not affected by any experience. So that's where I think that's helpful, is not in a manipulative way to try to get into a different state of mind or anything, but to just do a genuine inquiry and be curious about the nature of experience and to see, wow, my experience of that is that it moves totally on its own and that I'm left untouched no matter what story's showing up. Well, I think the biggest thing, is to just be really open to this idea of like, what if it's just not as it appears? Like, we all have so much evidence. When I was struggling with an eating disorder, I had so much evidence that I had a problem. There was something wrong with me. I had all the evidence in the world. You could not have talked me out of that because I knew. I'm like, no, look at what I ate yesterday and look at where my mind is going. Clearly, this isn't right. And so just to acknowledge that when we're suffering, we are suffering. It's very real. We have all the evidence in the world that's not who we truly are. And yet, what if all of that, again, is just based in some very simple misunderstandings? What if rather than that being a sign that there's something wrong with us or that we're broken or even that that's a problem, what if it's a simple misidentification? It's like watching a really scary horror movie on TV and forgetting that it's a movie. You would be like, oh my gosh, these people are trying to kill me and there's a real problem here. And then someone comes in and says, no, remember, it's a movie. There's a screen. That's not you. And then the whole thing looks and feels very different. And that might sound like an extreme kind of, illustration, but I think it's 100% accurate. I think that's exactly what's happening, is we live in this constant flow of experience and we think it's us. And when we confuse that with reality or me or whatever, we're going to suffer. But that suffering, again, gets to wake us up. So just to be curious and be open to the fact that maybe what's playing out there's a different side to the story. There's a different explanation for it. I think, as you said earlier, that curiosity is what I see take people right in. Not trying to find an answer, not trying to prove themselves right or wrong, or listening to anyone who's trying to give them answers, but just this simple openness and curiosity and these what if questions. Yeah, I just think it can change everything. It's like a zooming out, we're so innocently and we're conditioned to be this way. We're so zoomed in that we think I'm me and you're you and this is my experience and that's your experience, and everything just starts to look so solid and so true and so personal. But when we zoom out a little bit, we start to see a different side of things. Like you mentioned earlier, we can see someone else and we're naturally zoomed out when we see them. So we think, oh, you're fine. When it's us, the only difference is that we're so zoomed in, we can't see a bigger picture. When we zoom out and see that life is not personal, it's like you said, it's living us every minute of every day. We don't even have to do anything, honestly. We're woken up, thoughts show up, hunger shows up, like, sleepiness shows up. Like, we're so lived, and yet we've just so been pointed into our heads a lot, thinking that we need to, like, we're the ones doing everything and we need to figure it all out. So just that zooming out, kind of, you can look down on yourself as a character in this little movie called Your Life and see, wow, there's a lot going on. It's pretty good. This character isn't making everything happen. And exploring that kind of stuff, yeah, just so big. Well, I'm just grateful that you asked me to do this and that people are watching and interested in this. I'm so excited for everyone and grateful for people that are looking in this direction, and just open to seeing things in a different way. And I think many, many people are. We're so ready for it, and it's exciting.